Despite the fact that he was in possession of the keys to a $48 million contract with their airline, they refused to let him board, questioned his ticket, and requested backup. Nothing about Dorian Brant that morning seemed out of place. His collar fit his neck properly, and his suit was pressed. Like someone accustomed to early mornings and late meetings, he navigated Terminal 4 at JFK. He had a dark leather garment bag in his left hand. A first-class boarding card headed for San Francisco was in his right. In order to give the keynote address at the Western Produce Sustainability Summit, he was taking a plane out. Dorian had performed this act too many times to count at 58. He wasn't the type of man who required praise. Quiet efficiency was his preference. But as soon as he got at Gate 17 that morning, something broke in the air. There was still no line to board. A few folks were loitering close by, scrolling through their phones and drinking coffee. Calmly, Dorian approached the desk, nodded courteously to the young woman at the gate, and gave her his boarding card. She didn't look at it. Rather, she glanced up, and looked again. This time, more slowly. The expression people make when they are unsure whether to talk or remain silent. Dorian bided his time. He was not hurried, and his eyes were not questioning. With a roughness that wasn't appropriate for the circumstance, she declared, "This lane is for premium passengers only." "I understand," Dorian answered calmly. She paused, blinked, and finally checked the boarding card. Despite hovering over the scanner, her hand failed to click. Rather, she glanced at him again, before turning to face a co-worker behind her, and mumbling something that caused the other woman to glance over her shoulder. Dorian did not recoil. She went around again. She answered, "I'll need to see some identification." He cocked his head a little. "When scanning a pass, you don't typically ask for identification. Is something wrong?" She paused. "It's only a safety precaution." At the gate there was no rule mandating identification checks. He was aware of it. She did too. He handed them his license and took his wallet out of his inside pocket. Without looking at anything, she placed it clumsily on the desk after holding it, as if she was unsure of what to do with it. "Please wait a moment." Dorian looked at the pass below. His name, Dorian Brant, was printed clearly. He remained silent. A few paces away, the gate agent murmured once more, this time to a dark uniformed person. In a matter of seconds, a security guard approached them. This was nothing new to Dorian, but it had happened enough. The abrupt change from professionalism to mistrust. The moment someone stated he didn't belong, solely because they couldn't see someone like him in first class, not because of anything he said or did. There were no inquiries from the security guard. His eyes followed Dorian like a danger assessment checklist, as he stood next to him silently. Remaining composed, Dorian retreated from the gate and shifted to the side, away from the boarding lane. He had no intention of arguing. His voice would not be raised. He would not provide them with the performance they had hoped for. As an alternative, he took his phone out of his pocket and placed one call. Once, it rang. Twice. Then, "It's me, Maggie. Please bring up the catering agreement we signed 2 weeks ago with Horizon Air, the one that covers their paths to the west." "Yes. I'm at Gate 17 at JFK. I'll wait." He remained on the line, staring directly into the future. No feeling, no obvious signs of discontent. He was still there when the gate agent looked over. She leaned over the desk microphone. She addressed the passengers who were now starting to form a line behind him, saying, "We're just working through a minor issue. I appreciate your patience." But there was no patience. "Is he causing trouble, or something?" Leaned forward a businessman, wearing a grey pullover. It was heard by Dorian. He didn't look back. Maggie's voice came back on the line. "I got it. Are you okay with me calling corporate?" Softly he continued. "Just flag it. I believe they are going to realize something is wrong." After hanging up, he put the phone back in his pocket. He was still holding the boarding pass. He appeared to be waiting for an elevator, as he stood composedly. But it wasn't a complaint call. It served as a warning. Not all of the time did Dorian Brant fly first class or wear fitted suits. He grew up in a home with louder mornings and soft floorboards in Mansfield, Ohio. While his father, Leonard, alternated between working nights at the mill and mending neighbors' cars on the weekends, his mother, Eunice, worked in the produce department of a nearby grocery store. Despite their lack of possessions, there was always food on the table. Additionally, Dorian learned early on that one's demeanor matters. He woke up at 5 a.m. at 15, Before the store opened on Saturdays, he assisted his mother in sorting through crates of fruits and vegetables. He learned how to identify a ruined apple from 10 feet away, how to touch a ripe melon, and most importantly, how to communicate with others there. Avoid speaking to them. Speak with them. There is a distinction, and Dorian quickly figured it out. At the age of 23, he had earned a degree in agricultural business from Kent State, along with precisely $330,000 in student loan debt. Just outside of Columbus, he opened his first company as a roadside produce stand. He only had a rented pickup, a tent, and enough willpower to sell sweet corn like it was gold. He had no staff, not even part-time help. The true change occurred in his early 30s, when he saw that no one else was focusing on locally sourced, sustainably farmed food that could scale to satisfy grocery chain expectations without compromising quality. Not a boutique, not the farmer's market, just clean, authentic food that is delivered quickly. With just one delivery route, and a laptop that broke twice a week, Brant Global Foods started operations in a rented garage. He gradually established a network by striking direct arrangements with farms throughout the Midwest. His company didn't have a place at the table with national suppliers for over 15 years. Brant Global Foods currently feeds 5 university systems, more than 30 upscale grocery stores, and most recently, Horizon Air. He had been approached by the airline. In response to a series of negative reviews and unsatisfactory customer surveys, they sought to revamp their in-flight meals. I didn't see Dorian pitch. He paid attention. He then presented them with a proposal that included halving waste through packaging, direct farm-to-airline sourcing, and seasonal product rotations. They agreed to a contract worth $48 million. However, Dorian never forgot who he was. He didn't put plaques in the lobby, or use awards to adorn his office. A wall covered in farmer gratitude cards, and framed pictures of his old fruit stall, would greet you if you entered his Dayton facility. Maggie, his assistant, took care of the details. Dorian dealt with the populace. He disliked drama as well. He stayed out of the spotlight. Most importantly, he wielded power when necessary without discussing it. Therefore, it wasn't just an annoyance when the security guard at JFK viewed him like a possible issue, rather than a paying client, and the gate agent looked at his face more than his boarding card. It served as a reminder that some people only see what they expect to see, regardless of how many contracts he signed, or how many planes he assisted in stocking. And they begin to hunt for reasons to doubt you when you don't fit the stereotype they've formed of you. But Dorian didn't need to raise his voice to prove his worth. He had lived his entire life, letting his deeds speak for him. Did he make that call at gate 17? That wasn't the start of the issue. That was his way of giving the airline an opportunity to quietly correct it. Because Dorian Brant had a belief in standards as well as elegance. At gate 17, however, none of that mattered. Dorian Brant's identity was unknown to the woman at the gate. He was merely another name on a boarding permit that she didn't recognize, one that she had determined wasn't appropriate for the line he was in. Haley was her name. Mid-30s. After moving from Tulsa to JFK a month earlier, she was new to the position and ready to show herself. She was told to keep the peace, follow the rules, and not allow anyone to cross boundaries. She did not, however, have experience or intuition. The type that allows you to read a person or a room without making snap judgments. Passengers were already forming a line. Near the front, a man wearing a navy windbreaker paced while wearing a Bluetooth headphone. Behind him, a woman with a flowery carry-on stood, observing the wait. Haley whispered something about needing backup into the microphone on her collar. She turned to look at Dorian, who was standing off to the side, calm but not far away. Mia, her co-worker, bent over. "Is there a problem at all?" Haley gave a shrug. "He claims to be first class." Mia's eyebrow went up. "He is, according to his pass." "What's wrong?" Haley scowled. "It just feels wrong." Mia's stance changed at that point, not significantly, but enough to convey the warning to exercise caution. Haley, however, was not listening. Now she was intent on her screen, feigning to look for a non-existent booking note. Meanwhile, the security guard stood there with his arms folded, occasionally glancing at Dorian, but providing no justification for his presence. The passengers kept getting on board. It was getting thin in the first-class lane. Haley, looked in the direction of the gate. She didn't want to look foolish, but she now had an anxious look. Dorian's phone rang then. He took a few more steps to respond to it. Maggie spoke steadily. "Okay, I've already sent an alert to their regional VP. I also looped in Jack Rena. He's the head of food service integration on their end." "Thank you," said Dorian softly. "Keep me posted." He ended the call. His face was expressionless and serene. Mia found herself uneasy at the desk again. She drew Haley away. She muttered, "Do you realize who he is?" "That's Dorian Brant. I saw his company on the vendor list last week. The new produce deal with Horizon." Haley felt nauseous. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, he owns Brant Global Foods. They're working with us." Haley's lips became parched. Dorian was still holding his boarding card, and had not moved when she turned to face him. No anger. Avoid conflict. "Maybe we should just board him now," Mia suggested. However, Haley became anxious. "No, if we do it now, it looks like we—" A voice in her earphone interrupted her. "A manager." "Haley, I need a status on the hold at gate 17. We're showing a delay flag." She stopped. "Just handling a passenger issue, but it's under control." The boss didn't seem persuaded. "Make sure it is. We've got execs from corporate flying in this morning. No surprises." Haley's hands were unsteady. She turned back to face Dorian. The more he relaxed, the smaller she felt. There was nothing wrong with her. She was merging into one. Mia went to face him, prepared to say sorry. However, the boarding door beeped at that same moment. Another traveler entered. A man in khakis turned around and remarked, "What's going on with the holdup?" Haley remained silent. She was no longer speaking. Then Dorian walked slowly forward, toward the glass wall that overlooked the runway, not the desk. He watched a line of luggage carts pass by, while he stood with his hands folded behind his back. He wasn't rushing. He didn't feel nervous. He could see time working in his advantage. Haley was observing its expiration. However, the authorities were already en route. Cynthia Reyes was midway through a croissant and a quarterly operations report in an office, 10 stories above the airport terminal, with a view of the tarmac and the cityscape of Manhattan beyond. Her desk phone rang. Typically, she didn't answer calls from unfamiliar numbers. However, her assistant marked this one as urgent, because it had been transmitted twice. "I'm Cynthia," she replied. "Hello Cynthia." Maggie Geller, speaking on behalf of Brant Global Foods CEO Dorian Brant. "An incident involving Mr. Brant at Gate 17 has recently come to our attention." Cynthia straightened her posture a bit. "What sort of thing happened?" Maggie's tone remained formal. "Despite having a first-class ticket, it appears that your personnel has refused him boarding. We worry that it might get worse." Cynthia asked for specifics without wasting any time. She was aware of the stakes because she had seen Dorian's name enough. Brant Global wasn't just any vendor, and Horizon Air had just finished its supplier contracts for the upcoming fiscal year. The vendor was them, following a disastrous social media campaign that revealed the airline's frozen meals and unnecessary packaging. They were intended to assist in completely revamping the airline's food service image. It was more than just poor customer service. There was a live fire in a gas-filled chamber. Cynthia hurriedly answered, "I'll take care of it," getting to her feet and gesturing to her helper. "Is he at the gate yet?" "He is." Calm but obviously not being handled properly. With her heels resounding down the corridor, and her jacket in hand, Cynthia had already left her office. She looked at her helper. "Please bring me Elise and Sean from Brand Protection. Right now." Meanwhile, during a business lunch at the company's Minneapolis headquarters, Jack Renaud's phone called. Maggie omitted the formalities, and simply, "Jack, JFK is holding Dorian at the gate." Horizon staff flagged him for no reason. Jack almost let his fork fall. "You must be joking with me." "No, he personally called it in." Jack disengaged himself from the table. "I'll have Cynthia look into it. She's on the go already, just in case you might wish to prepare legally." He didn't answer, simply hung up and began to dial. Months of work on the new campaign rollout may be destroyed if this were made public. Press releases were planned. Start the editing process for videos.
They planned to use Dorian Brant as a spokesperson for contemporary food sustainability, as part of their Fall Fresh flight campaign. Someone who had no idea who they were dealing with was now sidelining that face at an airport gate. Haley was starting to perspire at gate 17. She could sense the change in the passengers' open muttering over the delay, as well as in Mia's cold quiet. People were checking the status of their flights on their phones. No boarding yet. Then suddenly, a woman in red heels with a phone still placed to her ear, and a man in a navy suit with a Horizon ID card strode approached the gate. Cynthia. She hung up, cautiously lowered the phone, and looked around. Dorian remained still. He did not go forward as he watched her approach. He was fully aware of her identity. Calm but direct, Cynthia held out her hand. "My name is Cynthia Raids, and I am the Executive Director of Regional Operations, Mr. Brant. Could we have a private conversation?" After giving a single nod, Dorian put his phone back in his pocket. Obviously, they took a couple steps back. Haley stood motionless behind them, uncertain whether to follow or vanish. Cynthia inhaled deeply. "I would like to apologize on behalf of Horizon Air, Mr. Brant. I've already reached out to our internal staff to investigate the matter. This shouldn't have occurred. I want to personally escort you into the aircraft." Dorian remained silent. He only inquired, "Are you aware of the seat I was given?" She looked at her tablet. "Seat 1A. He gave a small smile. "First row. Fascinating. I was informed that only premium travelers may use this lane."
Cynthia didn't flinch. "I apologize once more." Dorian leaned a little closer. "Miss Reyes, the error isn't the problem. It is based on an assumption." She took a deep breath, comprehensive. However, Dorian had no intention of seeking revenge. He was awaiting the reality. Haley remained still behind the gate desk. She was no longer talking into the headset, which was still fastened to her collar. A few feet away, she could see Cynthia and Dorian talking, their voices too soft to hear, yet loud enough to alter everything. The boarding of passengers had ceased. Nothing was moving, yet the monitors continued to show the flight on time. Mia refrained from glancing at Haley. She didn't have to. At the gate, everyone was already aware that something was off. Cynthia whirled to greet a tall, sandy-haired man with a black lanyard and a businesslike stance. This was Justin Cole, who served as Horizon's East Coast legal liaison. He knew better than to explain, having been briefed in the elevator. He reached out to Dorian. "I want to personally apologize, Mr. Brant. I am aware that this encounter has been—" Dorian softly interrupted him. "Mr. Cole, I don't need an apology. I need you to explain how we sign a $48 million transaction, and then something like this occurs." Justin hesitated. There was no satisfactory response, no predetermined answer, no deflection approved by PR. Cynthia took over. "We recognize the gravity of the situation, Mr. Brant. We're examining our sensitivity training protocols and employee conduct policies. However, we also want to reassure you that this does not represent our beliefs." Dorian's eyebrows went up. "You mean it doesn't reflect the values of the company, or the judgment of the gate agent?" Cynthia didn't answer. He pointed at Haley, who now appeared as though she would collapse behind the desk. Several times, she thought a well-dressed man with a premium ticket was in the incorrect line, made a security call, escalated as soon as I posed a query. "I don't need you to tell me what that is about. I have experienced it." Justin cleared his throat. "If you would like, we are ready to formally apologize, either in private or in public." Dorian's expression remained unchanged. "You believe I'm here to apologize?" They paused. He extracted a thin manila packet from his clothing bag. "Not much fanfare. Paper only. A signed copy of our contract is attached. Every fresh item on your Western and Midwest routes is now supplied by my company. By the way, that includes the produce utilized in your high-end lounge services. Therefore, I take it literally when I say that the individual being blocked at the gate represents your brand." Cynthia accepted the folder as if it were a burden. "A tweet is not what I want. A letter is not what I desire. I'm hoping for better. For what reason would you treat the next individual as a security risk for doing nothing at all? They might not be able to reach your VP directly." Quiet. Nearby passengers started whispering once more. While ostentatiously scrolling on her phone, a woman in the business class lane was actually recording. Justin made an uncomfortable change. "We'll start an evaluation right away, and reorganize our staff as needed. You have my word." Dorian checked his timepiece. "All right. After then, everyone can continue with their day." He turned a little and glanced at Haley before Cynthia could accompany him aboard. She held her badge in both hands like a shield, and now appeared pallid. Dorian looked at her for a moment, but his expression was one of disappointment rather than rage. He avoided talking to her. He didn't have to. The aircraft crew started to unblock the gate after Cynthia waved to them. Justin silently followed Dorian as he was led down the jet bridge. Mia moved to stand next to Haley at the gate. "You don't understand," she whispered softly. "Half the trays you serve in first class are filled with food from that man's company." Haley remained silent. However, that talk was not the true moment. That was the next step. They had previously briefed the cabin crew. Dorian was met with a degree of attentiveness that resembled a silent apology as he boarded the aircraft, rather than the typical robotic smile. Jordan, one of the flight attendants, offered to take his clothing bag, and another brought him a drink of water without asking. Jordan whispered almost silently, "Mr. Brant, just say the word if you need anything before takeoff." Dorian did not respond. Gestures didn't interest him. Sitting in 1A, he set the water down without touching it, and let out a breath through his nose, not a sigh of relief, just a breath, measured and under control. Something odd was going on outside. The terminal was at a standstill. The frequency of passengers checking the boards had increased. Initially, the status of Gate 17 changed from boarding to delayed. 10 minutes later, 2 more neighboring gates changed to the same. At Gate 18, a man wearing a grey blazer knocked on the desk and was informed that an internal systems review was taking place. Dorian wasn't the only one who flew. 3 more Horizon Air departures were delayed across the concourse. There are no particular explanations, only general terms like technical processing, crew coordination, and operational hold. Actually, a mild closure had been announced by corporate. A silent pause. Cynthia Reyes had entered a secure conference room behind the terminal, immediately after escorting Dorian on board. She was now on the phone with crisis management, HR, and legal. The instruction was unambiguous. Everything had to be evaluated before this occurrence became widely known. Gate logs, notes from staff, internal communications. They were pulling aside every worker who had come into direct contact with Dorian that morning. No one would publicly acknowledge it, but until the corporation had a clear picture of the extent of the damage, the plane was not going anywhere. Dorian closed his eyes and sat back on board. He wasn't upset. He was not agitated. However, his peacefulness was not calm. Experience was what it was, the kind that results from having to pretend for decades that things don't hurt because you're accustomed to them. The manager of a car dealership once turned away Leonard, his father, because he didn't look like he could afford it, he said. He recalled being mistaken for the valet at his first investor meeting in Columbus, and he reflected that it was still occurring, albeit at a higher height, after all this time. Jordan returned. "Mr. Brant," he began softly, "we have been asked to postpone our departure for a short time. Together with the terminal team, they are resolving an issue. We will keep you informed." Dorian gave one nod. After hesitating, Jordan said, "I witnessed what transpired outside. It was incorrect." Dorian's eyes opened. "I'm grateful." There was silence for a moment. Jordan continued, saying, "Last year at the sustainability conference, I advised my younger brother to see your speak. His field of study is agriscience. You gave him a sense of realism. I just thought you should be aware." For the first time since boarding, Dorian gave him a look, a tiny smile. Not a show. Simply human. "Thank you for that." The pilots exited the cockpit and spoke with a senior crew member close to the front as Jordan left. They spoke in a low voice, but not low enough. Dorian heard someone say, "Ground hold. I have no idea how long," and there was an audible grunt from a man somewhere in the back of the aircraft. "Data. This airline is a complete mess." Dorian remained silent, leaning back. He observed the clouds floating beyond the window. He had fulfilled his obligation. He wasn't responsible for the rest. The internal report arrived at Cynthia's desk. 20 minutes later. The logs from the gate were clean. There have been no threats reported. No complaints were made. The gate agent's call to security without a recorded justification was the lone anomaly. That was plenty in and of itself. Haley had been lifted off the ground by the time the airplane started to push back. Silently. Not a word. Not a scene. The itinerary for the following day did not include her name. Later that afternoon, a picture appeared. It was taken by someone in the terminal, showing Dorian standing composedly close to the gate, holding a phone to his ear, with the remark, he didn't raise his voice. He remained still. However, the entire airport paid attention. However, these kinds of stories don't always have a happy ending. In San Francisco, the aircraft landed shortly after 1:15 p.m. local time. As travelers hurried to their connections, rideshares and luggage claims, Dorian was among the last to get off the plane. Not until he was in the back of a black Lincoln and driving into the Marriott, where the Western Produce Sustainability Summit was already in progress, did he check his phone. The alerts were piled up. Emails from executives at Horizon. Maggie texted him to inform him that a draft letter had been sent by the legal team. Additionally, there was a link to a local news blog that had acquired information about the JFK incident. Nothing went viral. Not a single explosive. It's only a soft ripple going in the proper circles. The conference ballroom was bustling with activity. At first Dorian went in undetected. However, several attendees started to recognize him as he moved to the side of the stage, where his lecture was planned. He said a few brief hellos, a few hands. The airport was not mentioned. No pity. Just business. He liked it that way. 20 minutes later, before a packed house, he mounted the stage. His presentation did not specifically address what transpired at Gate 17. It dealt with the food supply chain's resiliency, on how little assumptions can have significant effects when it comes to sourcing, storage and delivery. He related the tale of a Kansas beet farmer, who almost lost his crop due to a single forgotten email, and how his company's communication channels were streamlined as a result of just one email. But he stopped toward the end. Sometimes the problem isn't the system, he added, glancing out at the group of business people, suppliers, academic researchers and logistics specialists. Occasionally, it's the shortcuts we use when interpreting others. There was silence for a minute. He said, whether we're talking about a new grower, a supplier, or someone standing at a gate with a valid boarding pass, what we assume tells the world more about us than it does about them. There was modest applause at that. Real, not thunderous. A man from a distribution company in Seattle then grabbed Dorian as he was leaving the stage and remarked, "Hey, that thing you said about shortcuts hit me harder than I thought it would." Dorian grinned. That's where the rot starts, in the shortcuts. Cynthia Reyes was sitting in her office back in New York, going over an internal audit team report. Dorian hadn't requested that Haley be dismissed, but her file had been marked. He had not requested payment. He hadn't even replied to the request for a public apology in writing. He didn't have to. Senior employees of the airline were fully aware of what had transpired and how close they had come to losing more than just a contract. In the weeks that followed, Horizon subtly revealed a new collaboration with a civil rights consulting body that focuses on bias prevention and workplace sensitivity. A few media publications made the connection. A spokesman for Horizon once made reference to Dorian in passing when she said, "Recent events reminded us of the work that still needs to be done." Dorian remained silent. He didn't share anything. He didn't retweet. He returned to his job. And after GQ contacted him for an interview, Maggie asked whether he wanted to speak with the media. He said, "Tell them I'm busy feeding people." Weeks went by, months after. Nevertheless, the tale persisted. People remembered it, not because it went viral online. It was told over supper by those who were in the terminal that morning. People began utilizing the picture of him standing motionless with a phone to his ear, in presentations about quiet leadership after they saw it. In the break rooms, employees of Horizon Air talked in whispers about it. Gate agents began to reconsider their assumptions, prior to grabbing a headset, prior to making an arbitrary backup call. While reading the post online, Eunice Brant, a retired grocery worker in Ohio, grinned to herself and exclaimed out loud in her kitchen, "Ish, that's my son." Sometimes saying nothing is the loudest thing you can do. Subscribe for more important stories if this one stuck with you.